Baby, wouldn't it be nice if we both spoke the same language? I could understand your troubles and you know mine, and we could be together all the time if we both spoke the same language. Baby, no sería lindo si nos dos habláramos la misma lengua. Podría entender tus problemas y sabrías los míos.
Hello. Why are all these pennies going into the same cup? Sounds stupid, doesn't it? Obviously, it's because I'm throwing them there. Very shortly, you'll see why I'm asking this seemingly silly question. Right now, however, I'd like to say hello and welcome to whoever you thought you were, you're a Jew. This is our third episode, entitled History of Israel, Rise of Eastern Religion. In the two introductory shows of this 13-week television series, I promised to show you the true relationships between things which most people think aren't related. One of those things was the relationship between the great religions practiced by us people here in the West, where we seek after an entity we call God, and the religions of the Orient, where they say there is no God, but they seek after a thing they call enlightenment. The exact and scientific relationship between God and enlightenment is a subject we're going to discuss 6 weeks from now, on Sunday, February 25th. Today we're going to look at some of the historical aspects of Oriental religion. In particular, we're going to look at some of the extraordinary coincidences of history, and we're going to do a little bit of math. When it's all over, you're going to see that it's a mathematical certainty that the Eastern religions were all started by God, if that is, you believe in God. If you're a non-believer, then I probably can't convince you of anything. So I guess we'll just have to see. Right now, let's take a look at some biblical history. Here's a timeline of religious history. We had to put Adam and Eve and Noah at the top to save space. Now the descendants of Adam and Eve were evil. So God sent a flood, and only Noah and his family survived. But the descendants of Noah were evil also. So God began his current plan for man's salvation. It began with Abraham. According to Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike, Abraham was the first Jew. He lived around 1800 BC. I think it's safe to say that there's no religion still practiced in the world today which can trace its roots back earlier than this date. That fixes 1800 BC as the date of the founding of modern religions. Now, if you follow this timeline, you'll see that there's a striking tendency for tremendously important religious events to occur every 600 years. I call this the 600-year cycles of history. Look, 600 years after Abraham founded the Jewish religion, Moses received the law on Mount Sinai. This law became the basis for the Christian law and the Islamic law. And through these, it became the basis for all law in the Western world. 600 years after Moses was the great Jewish diaspora of 600 BC. Since that's the subject of today's program, I'll pass over that for the moment. 600 years after that, Jesus of Nazareth preached the gospel to Israel and was murdered. On schedule, I might add. Another 600 years elapsed, and the prophet Muhammad converted the Arab people to the third great pillar of monotheism, Islam. That completed the development of the world's major religions. We can see, therefore, that there was a 2,500-year period from here to here, during which Judaism, Christianity, and Islam arose. Right in the middle of this period is the diaspora. What's a diaspora? Those of you familiar with Jewish history know that diaspora means a dispersal or scattering of the Jewish people. who were driven out of their homeland and scattered to the four corners of the globe. Why? The best answer I can give you is that the Jewish people were a disappointment to God. We've mentioned Adam and Noah in this regard. Now let's talk about Abraham. He left his home in Iraq, which back then, like today, was a seat of extreme corruption, allowing only one remedy: to leave. Abraham went to the land of Canaan, which today we call Israel, and started a new way of life. But this life was imperfect in many ways. For example, Abraham's wife Sarah was barren. So to placate him, she gave him her own Egyptian maid, Hagar, as a concubine. Hagar promptly gave birth to a son, Ishmael. Ishmael, as Abraham's only son, was therefore the heir to his fortune. Then, some years later, Sarah unexpectedly had a son of her own, Isaac. All of a sudden, she didn't want Hagar and Ishmael around anymore, so she pulled rank, ordering husband Abraham to eject Ishmael and his Egyptian mother permanently from the home. That would leave her son Isaac as the heir to Abraham's wealth. So what did good old Abe do? Why, he did what men usually do in order to abide by their women. He consented. Now Abraham, through his son Isaac, was the father of the Jewish world, and indirectly of the Christian world. Through his other son Ishmael, he was the father of the Muslim world. All these religions have been at war ever since. Do you see what I mean when I say Father Abraham was not perfect? The Bible drops the story of Ishmael at this point and follows only the line of Isaac. Isaac had a son named Jacob, whom God renamed Israel. Jacob was therefore the father of Israel, or the father of the Jewish race. Jacob himself had 12 sons who went on to become the patriarchs of the world-famous 12 tribes of Israel. If you haven't studied the Bible, you might think that these must have been pretty upstanding, moral sorts of people. Well, they weren't. They were jealous of their younger brother Joseph, so the other 11 ganged up on him and sold him as a slave to a caravan on its way to Egypt. They thought they were rid of him forever. How wrong they were. Many years later, there was a severe famine in Israel, and Jacob sent his sons down to Egypt to buy food. To their extreme embarrassment and terror, they found that their brother Joseph, who they thought was probably dead, was alive and well, and in fact had risen up from slavery and had prospered exceedingly. In fact, through a series of miraculous happenings, he'd become the governor of the entire nation, second in power only to Pharaoh himself. Fortunately for the brothers, Joseph was that extremely rare sort of person who, when he rose up to great worldly power, instead of becoming a total monster like most people would, he actually became even kinder and more generous than before. Although he could have had his 11 brothers executed with a wave of his hand, instead he forgave them. He prepared a place for them and ordered them and their father to relocate permanently to Egypt. And that, my friends, is how the Jewish nation ended up in Egypt. Subsequently, the Jews remained in Egypt for 4 centuries. During that period, their population grew to over 1 million souls. After the death of Joseph, however, a new pharaoh had arisen, who was not so friendly. As the years went by, the Jews, who had been greatly favored in the days of Joseph, came to be mistrusted and ultimately hated and feared. In the end, they were subjugated and reduced to slavery. Isn't that ironic? Joseph's brothers, the patriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel, sold him into slavery, and God, once again disappointed with his chosen people, turned the tables on them. And in the end, it was their descendants who wound up being the slaves. God sent Moses to deliver the Jews from their suffering. That he was able to persuade the Egyptians to let the people go must be counted as a miracle. But when he came down from Mount Sinai, what did he find? The children of Israel were worshiping a golden calf. For this and other crimes, the anger of the Lord was kindled, and he caused them to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. Again, the chosen people had proven to be a disappointment. Finally, after the years of wandering, the Jews entered into and gradually conquered the Holy Land, pushing back the nations which practiced pagan idolatry. The struggle went on for 300 years. The ancient Israelis reached their peak of power and success under the rule of King David and his son Solomon. This is the most famous hereditary bloodline in the world. This is the bloodline of Messiah. Now David was a military man, and he greatly enlarged the kingdom of Israel through wars of conquest. But Solomon never had to fight a war. Solomon expanded the empire through marriages with princesses. It's said that he had 900 wives and concubines, many of whom were royalty. During the reign of Solomon, Israel became one of the greatest empires the world had ever known. No one dared stand up to them. Solomon was an incomparably wealthy king. The tribute he received was beyond reckoning. The gold alone from the legendary King Solomon's mines was said to be worth $6 billion. In today's money, every year, $6 billion a year. But Solomon in his old age got weak. Most of his wives were foreigners who practiced pagan religions, and throughout his life they constantly nagged him for permission to set up the idols of their ancestral gods. Solomon wisely refused his wives' demands, at least during his youth. But in his old age he caved in. The irony is horrifying. In Israel, known throughout the world as the chosen people of God, we suddenly saw the whole-scale reintroduction of idolatry. All the prophets to a man began to prophesy doom. Immediately after Solomon's death, there was a civil war, and the nation split into two parts. The northern kingdom, comprising 9.5 tribes, turned firmly to pagan religion and became a money-grubbing, sexually perverted whorehouse, kind of like America today. The southern kingdom didn't do much better. At first, they plunged into pagan revelry also, but there were two significant religious revivals which kept the Jewish religion alive there, but only barely so. The Bible reports that the Lord God was enraged with Israel, so he decided to cast them out. He handed the northern half of the kingdom over to the Assyrians around 700 BC. The Assyrian invasion was a horrible thing. It's said that the kings of Assyria, after a battle, would skin hundreds of people alive and nail them to a wall, still alive and twitching. Then the king would order a feast. He ate while the victims twitched. The Assyrians sent every single Jew in the northern kingdom into permanent exile, and not long afterwards, the Babylonians attacked and destroyed the remaining southern half of the Israeli kingdom. They took all the upper-class Jews, people they thought they could get useful services from. They took them to Babylon in chains. They became the remnant from which the modern Jewish race developed. They were not very numerous. According to some estimates, the number was as small as 30,000 people. As for the rest of the hundreds of thousands, or perhaps even millions of inhabitants of the southern kingdom, their fate is unknown. The history of ancient Israel, the chosen people, was over, and the population, consisting without a doubt of over 1 million people, was scattered to the 4 corners of the globe. This is the diaspora, and it occurred at about 600 BC on our timeline. Then an amazing thing happened. One by one, in rapid succession, all the Oriental religions of the world suddenly appeared, within a century of each other, and in precisely the same century as Israel went into exile. Here's the list of extraordinary things which happened at this time. Buddha began teaching a new religion in India. In China, a prophet named Lao Tzu started Taoism. The Hindus, who previously had been idolaters, with hundreds or thousands of gods, suddenly said that all those gods were manifestations of one single god. Hence, they became monotheists. Mahavira started the Jain religion in India. Confucius began teaching in China, and Zoroaster became the prophet to the Persian Empire. Furthermore, it should be noted that this was the time of the beginning of Greek civilization. Since the first 6 items on this list constitute essentially the entire collection of Oriental religions in the world, the fact that they all arose at a single moment in time must be counted as extraordinary. Let's see if it really was a coincidence, or if, perhaps, there isn't some better explanation. All the major religions of the world arose between 1800 BC and 600 AD. That's a period of 2,500 years, or 25 centuries. Right in the middle of this timeline, Buddha appeared in India and preached a new faith. Now look at the next item on our list, Taoism. This is one of the two native religions of China. Taoism was founded by a legendary prophet named Lao Tzu. It appeared in China at about the same time as Buddhism appeared in India. Now you may think of India and China as being right next to each other, but to get to the main cities of China from India, you have to cross the Himalaya mountains, then go another 3,000 miles. In those days, such a journey was a formidable undertaking. How can we invoke the ministry of the Indian, Buddha, to account for a religious conversion in China, 3,000 miles away? And consider this. Europe is a lot closer to Israel than China is to India, yet it took 1,800 years before the religion of Israel reached Europe as Christianity, and another 600 years again before the emergence of the third great pillar of monotheism, Islam. Again, we must ask, why did these things all happen at the same time? These places aren't close together at all. Could this have been mere coincidence? Let's do some math. Let's say that the emergence of Buddhism in 600 BC was a random event, unrelated to anything other than the fact that Buddha, who was a prince, made a personal decision to abandon his throne and his fortune, and to seek enlightenment, willingly choosing the life of a homeless ascetic in the forest. If the emergence of Taoism in China 3,000 miles away was also a random event, then what are the chances that Lao Tzu, the legendary founder of Taoism, would have made the same decision Buddha made at the same time? Well, that's easy to calculate. There were 25 centuries on our timeline, so I'm strongly inclined to say that those odds were 1 chance in 25. It's like a roulette wheel with 25 numbers. What's the chances that your number will come up? 1 in 25. But we have not one coincidence here, we have 8. And the first 6 of them constitute the entire body of Eastern religion. What's the chances that the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th would all occur in the same century as the first, if they had nothing to do with each other? That's easy to calculate. According to the laws of probability, you multiply. 1 divided by 25, 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 which happens to come out to about 1 chance in 10 million. Do you still think the sudden appearance of the 6 Oriental religions, all in the same century, in different nations stretching all the way across Asia, from the Mediterranean Sea to the Pacific Ocean, was a mere coincidence? If so, then ask yourself this. Why are all these pennies going into the same glass? This is the same silly sounding question I asked at the beginning of the show, and the answer is still the same. They're all going into the same glass because I'm putting them there. Are you starting to get the idea? If I was pitching pennies at random, some of them would go here, some of them would go here. If they all end up in the same glass, then there must be an intelligent force behind it. Similarly, if all these religions, which could have appeared during any time in this 25 century period, if these religions all appeared in the same century, there must be an intelligent force behind it. When 8 things happen at the same time, then it's a safe bet that they must be related. Ask yourself this question. Which one of these things can explain the other 7? Well, if you think about the list, you'll realize that as a matter of fact, there are 7 like things and 1 thing which is different. The like things are the appearances of 7 new and exciting changes in the fundamental makeup of 7 nations. 6 of these 7 changes were new religions. The 7th was the inauguration of the great intellectual and philosophical empire of ancient Greece. These were all wonderful things. The 8th thing, which was markedly different from the other 7, was a negative thing, a horrible thing. It was the destruction of the nation of Israel, the chosen people of God, by two hordes of invading barbarians. Clearly, if one of these 8 things can explain the other 7, then this is it. If the diaspora, or forced exile of 1 million or more Jews, was responsible for Oriental religion, then there ought to be evidence that the Jews went to all these places. Well, there is, and lots of it. Everywhere from Western Europe clear over to China, there are Jewish populations whose descendants persist to this day, who trace their roots to the great diaspora of 600 BC. There's no hope of reviewing all this history in the moments remaining, so I'll limit my comments to a quote from Strabo, the great Greek historian and geographer, whose work, called Geography, was the major work of its kind in the early Roman Empire. Strabo said, "These Jews have penetrated to every city, and it would not be easy to find a single place in the inhabited world which has not received this race and where it has not become master." All right, what does it all mean? Well, what it will mean to you will depend on what you think the diaspora means in the first place. If you're a believer, then you already know that the Jewish people were a disappointment to God, just as all the rest of us have been all along. The chosen people disobeyed his commands at every opportunity, and ultimately they refused to turn away from idolatry and world worship. The prophets, to a man, warned that the wrath of God would be upon the nation unless it repented. It did not. The people remained stubborn, greedy, ruthless, and arrogant, so God kept his promise of punishment and sent nearly the entire nation into exile at the hands of the Assyrian and Babylonian invaders. You have to decide for yourself whether you believe that the diaspora was the work of God or not. If you're a believer, then there's nothing left to decide. God said it, he did it, and there's nothing more to discuss. What then about the sudden appearance of new religions everywhere these Jews went? What are we to make of that? Considering the 1 in 10 million magnitude of the coincidence involved in the simultaneous appearance of 6 new Oriental religions, we must reject chance as an explanation out of hand. It was no coincidence. If you believe that God exiled the Jews, then you must accept the obvious, that God also intended for the Oriental religions to form. If this wasn't the hand of God, whose hand can it have been? The closest I can come to a secular explanation is this. It's beyond a shadow of a doubt that the fame of Israel, especially during the glorious days of Solomon, was known everywhere in the world that human beings dwelt. Imagine yourself living in, say, China. All your life you've known about the legendary wisdom and fabulous wealth of Solomon. Now imagine tens of thousands, or even hundreds of thousands of refugees suddenly pouring into your country from that very same legendary kingdom. What a sight that must have been! Here, the chosen people of God, suddenly arriving as beggars, their earthly belongings being hauled along on broken wagons, or even being carried on their backs, and each one of them telling the same story. We sinned against God Almighty. He warned us through the mouths of his prophets. We failed to heed the warning, and now this is our just punishment. What a story. Living human proofs of the power of the Lord, thousands and thousands of them, marching in as lowly refugees one after another, each one in a profound state of repentance, each one telling the same horrifying story. It's not at all difficult to imagine the effect this might have had on the local populations. Everyone had heard of God, but many people would not believe until they'd seen. Now they were seeing, or at least seeing first-hand evidence of God's existence and of his power. Now, Buddha once described enlightenment as being like a flame, which, once ignited in one person, could spread to others like fire. Well, these Jews came in with a burning fire of their own, the fire of the knowledge of and of the fear of God, and they spread it like wildfire wherever they went. However, in each country into which they entered as refugees, this new knowledge of God entered into the Oriental mind and re-emerged in a form not intelligible to Westerners. How then can we be sure it was indeed the hand of God which did these things? In 2 ways. First, We can study the biblical account of creation and mankind's fall from grace. As we shall see on February 25th, this fall from grace was indeed a fall from enlightenment. I know some of you don't believe that now, but I'll prove it to you on Sunday, February 25th, when we discuss the relationship between God and enlightenment. The second way is to consider the sheer mathematical odds involved, which simply defy any rational explanation other than the one I've just given. Again, I ask, if this wasn't the hand of God, then whose hand can it have been? Well, once again, we've run out of time. Thanks for watching. Whoever you thought you were, you're a Jew. Please tune in again next week when we'll be considering this issue. The Bible says that the house of David will rise up again in the end times. I've just shown you that the descendants of David have been scattered far and wide. So we're going to ask the following question. Where is David now? And how will we recognize him when he comes? That's all for now. So long, and I hope we'll see you next week.
Focus on the one thing that I'm sure